Good evening. You're watching the main news on HKIBC. I'm Carain Yeung.
And I'm Raymond Yeung. Here are tonight's top stories. Metal handrail thrown onto train tracks in suspected act of vandalism.
More China Airlines flight disruptions as ground staff ask their pilot colleagues to end strike.
And Turkey labels China's treatment of ethnic Uyghurs great embarrassment for humanity.
Police are investigating an act of vandalism after a 17-meter-long metal handrail was hacked off from a footbridge and thrown onto the train tracks below.
The incident caused a brief service disruption on the MTR's East Rail line early this morning. Riley Chan reports.
Services on the MTR's East Rail line were briefly disrupted early this morning, following what is believed to be an act of vandalism. At around 5:40 a.m., the railway operator announced trains between Tai Po Market and Fanling stations were disrupted after technicians detected a power failure. Temporary shuttle buses services were then arranged to ferry passengers between the stations. While emergency repairs were completed after half an hour, police were called in 2 hours later when staff discovered a piece of metal handrail on the tracks near Tai Po station. The piece of equipment, measuring 17 meters in length, is believed to be removed from this footbridge on Tai Po Service Road East near Kowloon Hang. A section of the handrail was charred and punctured. The overhead line, meanwhile, suffered superficial damage but was otherwise intact. A preliminary investigation suggested that the handrail was hacked off from their wall joints and thrown onto the tracks below, hitting the power line. Forensic officers later arrived at the scene to take photos and collect evidence. While surveillance cameras were installed at a nearby construction site, they were of little help as it turned out they were not recording at the time. Police believe it was an act of vandalism, but no one has been arrested yet. Riley Chan, HKIBC.
It is unlikely the government's surplus in the coming fiscal year will surpass $100 billion, as was the case last year, Financial Secretary Paul Chan warned.
But Chan said there is no need to cut back on expenditure, adding that the government will only have to be prudent with its spendings.
In a record, the government netted a surplus of $149 billion in the 2017 to 2018 fiscal year, pushing its reserves past the $1,100 billion mark. Both the government and analysts warned that another bumper surplus was unlikely this year, but Financial Secretary Paul Chan is already looking ahead. In his weekly blog post, the finance chief predicted that it was unlikely the surplus next year would exceed the super high level of $100 billion. This means the government would have relatively limited resources to mobilize. Chan said external uncertainties not only slowed down local consumption and exports growth, but also hurt business confidence. However, long-term policies or investments should not be interrupted by temporary economic fluctuations, Chan insisted. We don't have to cut back on expenditure because of temporary changes, Chan said. The key is to remain prudent and to try to maintain a fiscal balance in the long run. With the latest budget scheduled in just over 2 weeks' time, Chan reviewed around 40 consultation sessions have been held in the past 3 months to listen to the public's views. In a first, Chan also took to social media to engage with the public. While Chan pledged to study the feasibility of some idea with policy bureaus, he said major livelihood policies and adjustments must be executed through the policy address. He also admitted money cannot solve all issues overnight, especially on the pressing problems of housing, public health care services and the shortage of elderly care homes. Rather, he said authorities would have to identify the root cause and tackle the problems step by step, which would require patience and public support.
More China Airlines flights were cancelled or delayed after 6 hours of negotiations between the pilots' union and the management broke down yesterday.
But in a twist to the development, some of the airline's ground staff staged a protest calling for an end to the industrial action. More from Riley Chan.
A strike led by China Airlines pilots is now into its third day after 6-hour negotiations between the union and the management broke down yesterday. But not all of the airline's employees sided with the pilots. Over 100 ground crew members from Taiwan's largest carrier staged a protest outside the Ministry of Transportation in Taipei this afternoon, calling for an end to the industrial action. They criticized the pilots for causing frontline staff trouble, as they had to deal with frustrated and angry customers. The group argued that the striking pilots only accounted for 10% of the airline staff, questioning their representativeness. But the pilots' union maintained that their action was backed by their colleagues. From what we learned from flight attendants and ground crew members, they all support the strike, the union's chairwoman Li Xinyan said. I think the protesters don't really understand what the movement is about. In a bid to break the deadlock, the airline offered compromises yesterday, including adding one additional pilot on flights lasting 12 hours or more to address complaints of fatigue. But the two sides failed to reach a consensus on other issues, such as manpower arrangements on medium-haul flights and a more transparent promotion mechanism. Li said they had yet to set a date for the next round of talks, but are looking forward to a better deal from the company. The union has now collected over 500 work passes from pilots so far, representing 38% of the airline's pilots. In what could be a sign of desperation, Taiwanese media had obtained a company roster suggesting trainee pilots were made first officers on certain flights to keep planes in the air. But there was no confirmation from the carrier. For the third straight day, hundreds of passengers were stranded at Taoyuan and Kaohsiung airports after their flights were cancelled or delayed. Over in Hong Kong, inbound and outbound flights from Taipei remained unaffected in the morning, but 2 flights between the city and Kaohsiung were delayed. Several flights were cancelled in the afternoon and tomorrow. The airport authorities said it would closely monitor the situation and urged passengers